This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air for the first time with Luke Worsfold, founder and CEO of um, Inside Addiction. So thank you for talking to us today, and welcome to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast.
Awesome. Thanks very much for having me on the show.
So one of the things we also have to mention is we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. You see that listed on Newsly up there. And the audience, if they use coupon code GHOST, they get 1 month free premium subscription. And we're a featured podcast there. It's audio only on that platform. You can check that out later today. One of the other things I want to let people know is we're actually at episode 972 with this episode of the Family Electric Ghost podcast, tracking that on Apple Podcast. And for those of you who are just listening, we do have the URL of www.insideaddiction.co.uk/y. That will be fully clickable when we're published. Maybe you can tell the audience what would happen if they click there.
Yeah, so at Inside Addiction/y, there's an amazing assessment people can go and take if they're wondering if they're drinking too much, where their level of drinking or drug use is. They can go there, they'll get an online assessment, they'll map out for them their social life, their background, their subconscious programming, their situation, their level of dependence on a drug or alcohol. And it really gives them a 38-page report that will really crystallize exactly what steps they need to take. So that's just a free resource your audience can go and check out.
That's awesome. So this episode, what we're going to talk about is unmasking male mental health and navigating the intersection of emotional suppression and substance abuse. So that's a big topic. Maybe you want to give a little bit of your background from your biography to the audience before we tackle that.
Perfect. So I grew up with a mum who was a drug addict. She drank and used drugs. And when I was 10, she passed away. She died from drinking and using drugs. And that was really challenging. I think what's important to note is as a young man, I didn't really understand how to handle those emotions, how to deal with what was going on, that grief at that early age. And ultimately, I ripped out anything that connected my head to my heart, just all of that emotions. I just shut it all down, pushed everything down into the depths of my soul, never to be found again. And that was really, really challenging for me going through that at an early age, just when I was going into like the older years of school, trying to find my feet, trying to find out who I was as a young man. That was a really challenging thing for me to experience. And my environment at that time was around my brothers and my dad. So I had two older brothers who were 4 and 5 years older than me, and my dad, my dad is quite an emotionally sort of shut down man, quite consistent, and has been an amazing dad, but at the same time, not really emotional or in touch with his emotions. And my brothers, they kind of vary as well. And especially at that young age when they were, 14, 15, what we used to do as young men is we just used to beat each other up. It was like boys will be boys, let's fight, let's have, let's play, let's fight, let's kind of beat each other up and have a good time. And it was just shrugged off, boys will be boys. That's just how it went. But as time went on, I then got into drinking drugs, right? I started at a early age around school, kind of trying my first cigarette, trying my first drink, trying my first joint, my first line of coke, and so on and so forth. And that, at that time, was when I first started to dabble in drugs and drinking, and when I sort of realized, oh, some of these stresses I'm experiencing kind of get taken away when I'm drinking and using drugs. It makes me cool. It raises my status. Like it's good to be doing this in some ways. There was that positive association that started to come and started to form. And again, if you look back at the childhood, right, of growing up without so many emotions, being really emotionally shut down, the drugs just slotted in the perfect timeline in that situation. And then from that point onwards, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking because your mother, I mean, a lot of times in a family, the mother is the one that does more emotional work than the father typically. And then your mother was gone, and then your father was emotionally distant. So you didn't have really good, examples of how you should take care of those emotions because you didn't have, any kind of warmth or emotional support based on what you're just saying. And so that, you were fighting with your brothers, you weren't getting the kind of tool set that you need to understand the tragedy or what had happened. So that's it's like all building up. It seems like in your psyche, in your soul.
Yeah, 100%. Like you say, rightly, all building up, all just creating layers and layers and layers of just masks and, you know, pushing emotions down. And although my dad and my brothers were as supportive as they could be, right, it's just like you just don't know how when you're that age. It's just such a big thing. My dad didn't know what to do, right? His kind of ex-wife just died, and he's trying to hold the family
Mhm.
together and keep everything under wraps. So he's trying to do his best, and everyone's trying to do what they can. It's just a really difficult situation to go through, and those layers built and that was reinforced as I went to school, right? Being around other guys, being around other men, and
Mhm.
just having to stand out, not be bullied, trying to stick up for myself, trying to find my place in the world just was challenging as a man. And when I left school, I then went on to become an entrepreneur and run my own business. And I started my own web design and marketing company. And again, that was a very male environment, being a businessman, being shrewd, negotiating, not having emotions, being ruthless,
Mhm.
being shut off, just everything's business, just doing the deal. And I even used to say to my business partner, if you want a friend, get a dog. I used to be so trying to be this person and
Yeah.
have such a mask on. I was like, I'm not even my business partner. I'm not going to be vulnerable. I'm not going to show emotions. I just need to be tough so I can power on through and not deal with everything. But in the background and subconsciously, out of my awareness, it was just building and building and building and building, like just this massive sort of bag of shit I was carrying around with me, this bag of just stuff that was just all my trauma that I was just trying to carry around into my future. And that made running a business really hard and really stressful. I didn't know how to deal with the stress or my mental health or any of those emotions at that time. And that led me to drink and use drugs even more, right? It had been introduced to me in my past. And when I was running that
Yeah.
company,
Stress at
it
work.
just continued. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it just continued and continued and continued, and I wasn't allowed to be vulnerable. I wasn't allowed to have emotions. I just had to be a businessman and get on with it. So that gives you a bit of context of some of the layers that have been built over my life.
Yeah, you had talked about when we were talking about the whole main title was unmasking male mental health, and like a lot of men, they think they got to be rigid and cold and aggressive and not have the warmth that's associated with like women, or other people, and just not be in touch with their inner child or their self or their emotions. The thing is, we're as an artist, I run into a lot of like men and that are more open because if you're a singer songwriter or you're an artist, you tend to try to access that, and then uh, have a lot of female friends who are artists, and we kind of talk in those zones. But it's like when we talk, we're not talking about sports. We're not talking about like how just kind of we get into like very deep things that most people. When I'm talking to people who aren't artists, they don't they're like, oh, you're talking about something that's too deep to talk about on the first conversation. They don't want to go there, but it seems like that's part of the thing that a lot of people, when they start to have to go through recovery, they have to start to maybe open that up, and that's probably a hard thing if you've been not told that that's a norm. But like if you've been told like men are not supposed to do that, how do you kind of go and challenge that concept?
Yeah, it's really, really challenging in many ways. I think there is that balance between masculinity and kind of vulnerability, and they're kind of on opposite sides. And like you said, emotions are kind of seen in, from me growing up, in my opinion, they were seen as like this thing that women had. They're emotional, they're all over there with their emotions, and we're men and we're meant to go and, slay the dragon and get on with things and be hard nosed. And like I say, in business, that really hurts. So for me, and for a lot of the clients I work with and a lot of the people that I come into contact with, normally there's like a big instant that happened. So for me, I was thousands of pounds in debt, trying to run the business, trying to get everything sorted, trying to keep everything under control, all the plates spinning in the air, and eventually it just came crumbling
Mhm.
down. I went from drinking and using drugs, kind of like every single week to like every day, and it just became a mess. And I was just overwhelmed and flooded by my emotions. It's like these emotions I just shut down for so long, Then there was this big event that happened, and my emotions were just so out of control and so there, I couldn't ignore them anymore. And that's what happens for a lot of clients. It's like I'm not, and a lot of men in general, I'm going to suppress my emotions, suppress my emotions, suppress my emotions. And eventually, after years and years and years of just suppressing emotions, they'll just explode. And then all the emotions will come up. Then they'll be like, how do I deal with these? What happens now? What's going on? I'm really exposed. I'm really vulnerable now, just by default, by life giving me a good old kick in the teeth. What happens? And for me, I didn't really know what to do. I was overwhelmed by all of my emotions from the failing business and just the failure in general, and just from doing all of the drugs and trying to numb everything out. I ended up, after trying some AA meetings and researching rehab and trying a few different things, for me, what really worked was when I discovered an addiction specialist therapist. Now, my therapist was amazing. She was a woman, and I just went in that first session and I just said to myself, Luke, if you're going to do it, just play it all out. And although I really just feared like I was going to blow up or explode or spontaneously combust as a result of feeling these emotions, I didn't know what was happening. And that really scared the actual crap out of me, right? Not knowing what was going to happen. But I walked into that first session and I just kind of emotionally vomited on the therapist. And I was just like, this is all the stuff from my life. And I just kind of emotionally vomited everywhere and just got everything out. And that was a really, really big release, right? That was just the beginning, but that was just a really big release, just to get all of the emotions out and just tell all of the story to someone who just sat there and listened for an hour. And that was the start. That was the start of just even acknowledging that I had emotions. And I think that was really important, just to acknowledge that, just to say, okay, I am a human being. I have my financial bank account, which I valued a lot, that was now at zero or minus. And then I also recognized that I had my emotional bank account. And I was like, okay, there's this whole other side here called my emotional bank account. I need to start paying attention to that one, because this, just what I've been doing in the past, hasn't been working. And that's when I embarked on therapy, to really work on my emotional bank account and start moving forward.
So I mean that's real important that I think I've talked to a lot of people in this kind of space where people have that crucible moment. They have that thing that happens and it just like you can't control it. They bottle it up and then it kind of you have to address it. Did you have anybody that kind of pointed you to therapy, or did you said you started like AA, but you started to realize that you weren't going to solve it by yourself, right? You needed to find somebody.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So a few different things happened and aligned around that time. So firstly, I was into personal development and looking at mentors online, and some of them had mentioned therapy and becoming your authentic self and being vulnerable. A guy that had a big impact on me is a guy called Phil McKernan, and he spoke a lot about authenticity and becoming your authentic self. And I was like, the person I am now, he's not authentic. He's trying to be someone on the outside and he's someone else on the inside. That's the opposite of authenticity, right? So I was like, all these masks and layers I've built up over the years, that's not authentic. I want to go and become authentic. I didn't know what that meant. Just wanted to go and become authentic. I just had this idea. And then another moment that really kind of helped shatter all of my denial is I was sitting on a park bench, kind of having the last few drags on a joint after a heavy night of drinking and doing coke. And I remember trying to call all the people in my phone book, trying to find people who would lend me more money so I could just keep going and going and going and just ignore the sort of hole I was in. And I remember looking at my phone and I had one number left. And this number was an old business mentor of mine and a good friend. And I didn't want to call him because I just knew who he was and that he'd kind of just see right through things. But I pressed call anyway because I was so desperate in that moment. And I called, and as I tried to, bullshit my way through the call, he just could see right through it, and he just cut me off with a sentence that changed my life forever. And he just said, Luke, you're a crackhead. And although I'd never actually used crack, in that moment, it just pierced through all my denial. And I realized I'm an addict, just like mum, heading towards death. I'm just going to end up dead from drinking and using drugs. And it was at that point I really woke up and I was like, whoa, this isn't going to end well. And those two things combined really helped me realize, okay, I want to become authentic. I'm heading towards death if I don't change. And that really motivated me to seek therapy and go into therapy, just wanting to become my authentic self and wanting to change my behavior and not do drugs and not drink and just not die from addiction and really move and grow in the right direction.
Now, one of the questions you like to answer, and given the situation with your mom, the idea, what the concept, or the question is addiction a choice? And it seemed like there was a path that was kind of preset because of what happened with your mother. But the question is, is addiction a choice, or were you kind of predisposed to it because of what happened with your mom?
Yeah. So I think this is really important in terms of nature nurture. There's loads of different debates and arguments on this particular topic. Some people would say it's a disease and you've got a disease and you need to treat it like a disease and you'll have that disease for the rest of your life. Some people will say it's nature and it's genetic, or your mum was an addict and it's genetically passed down to you. Or it could be nurture, right, in terms of learned behavior. I feel like it's important to recognize, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of my own opinion, that I feel like it's nurture in terms of learned behavior, learning those coping mechanisms. But in terms
Mm-hmm.
of a literal choice, I wasn't choosing to drink and use drugs in many ways. I feel like what we discount a lot is a lot of people have all this trauma in their life. And because of all the trauma that happens in their life, they then can't regulate their emotions. And because they can't regulate their emotions, they're then drinking and
Mm-hmm.
using drugs. So is it a choice? It's not like a choice as in I'm picking up this to damage everyone in my life and hurt everyone. It's more like I am a person who has been through my mum dying, bullying at school, my parents being premature, having my older brothers, all of those different things and touch points in my life that happened.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things led up and created trauma where I couldn't regulate my emotions. So I think it's important to recognize that it wasn't necessarily a choice, but it is my choice how I respond, how I change my
How you
behavior, how
respond
I
to it?
take charge of my mental health. You know, I think it's Gabor Mate that said, "It's not we're not responsible for the world that created us, but we are responsible for the world in which we create," something like that.
Yeah.
And it just really states that we are responsible for what we are creating in the world and what we're growing and what we're doing. So that's a really important point. And secondly, I'd also add to that from the research I've done with clients, so I've surveyed hundreds of clients, and common things happened in their past, and I don't remember the exact statistics, but a lot of them lost someone important in their life. Like for me, it was my mum. A lot of clients have all lost a key
Mm-hmm.
person in their life. Their parents or someone, a key member in their family, was a heavy drinker. They also went through and perhaps moved around a lot as a kid, moved to different locations, moved to different schools, had a lot of uncertainty and instability. They also experienced divorce or their parents splitting up as a kid. That's another big one that happens to a lot of people. And also, for about 1 in 6, there was some kind of physical or sexual abuse in their childhood. But it
Mm-hmm.
just goes to show that there's a lot of trauma that underlines the clients I work with and their sort of drinking and substance abuse, right? So is it a choice? Well, they didn't choose to go through all of that
All
trauma,
the
right? They
things,
didn't
yeah.
choose to have all that done. They can choose to behave differently and regulate their emotions rather than drinking and using drugs,
Yeah, I
but they
mean,
didn't choose for that.
I took sociology in college, and there's a lot of, we talked about in sociology the concept of the anomy, kind of being disconnected from society, and in the microcosm and the macrocosm. So, in the microcosm of your like individual family, like you're not within the social bigger group of society, you have all these factors, like in psychology, get kind of crosses into it, but yeah, people don't understand. Like, it's not totally the individual. Like, if you got this total individual mindset, kind of a capitalist kind of mindset, like everybody's totally responsible for everything, and without understanding the outside environmental factors, right, and then the inside of your genetics. So there's a lot of things. Words matter. Like, how many people have been damaged by limiting beliefs because of a parent or somebody bullying, and then they think they're not good enough, and then they look for solace within drink or drugs or some kind of behavior. And so people who have this mindset, well, my words don't matter. It's all that individual. It's all somebody else. That's a big problem because the society, as you said, the divorce, the bullying, the limiting beliefs. These are things that are not exactly, you know that you can control. And so the act like an individual can just totally just like rebound from that without any tools. And a lot of times our education system doesn't really give people by the time you get out of high school, any kind of emotional training. It depends on the parent to do that, and then some parents are failing at that. So what are you going to do?
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah.
So one of the things about the maybe we can talk about the levels of addiction. It seems like from your description, you were like functioning addict. You had a business, and then it seemed like the level got totally out of control because of what was going on in your life. That eventually, like you reached to a higher level of addiction. Maybe you can talk about the levels.
Yeah, no, perfect, perfect. So I definitely think that this is something that is important in addiction because there's different levels. I put them on a continuum. So on the far right, for example, you have a dependent drinker or a dependent drug user, and that's someone who drinks every single day at high levels. Like they have to drink in the morning, perhaps vodka, to stop the shakes in order to fill up their body with that chemical because they're physically dependent on it and they have to drink. But then the next level up that I come across a lot is a daily drinker. And that's someone who drinks every single day, but not to the same volume as a dependent drinker. So that's maybe like a bottle of wine a night, a glass of wine a night. Kind of when they come in from work, they're drinking
Mhm.
every single day, but not at that like level or volume of a dependent drinker. Then the next level up is a weekend drinker. So that's someone who drinks every single week, but not every single day. So maybe that's at the weekend where they go out with their friends and they drink 2 or 3 nights of the week, or they drink on a Tuesday, or they go out with work 3 or 4 times a week. They're drinking every single week, but not every single day. Then the next level up from that is a binge drinker. So that's someone who looks at the rest of the people on the continuum and goes, "Oh, I'm not as bad as them. I don't really have a problem. I'm okay." But what they're doing, they may go a week without drinking, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 months. But when they do drink, they really go to town. They binge for days at a time or loads in one go. They get really hammered. They turn off their phone. They perhaps do loads of cocaine. They just cause an absolute mess. And that happens like once every couple of months. So it's important to
Mhm.
recognize there's different levels of drinking and using drugs. And a lot of the industry focus on the dependent level, right? When you get dependent on alcohol or drinking, that's when we're going to give you support on the NHS or with healthcare or with rehab. That's when we're going to support you, is when we're at that level, when everything has got that bad. But I like to say, why do we have to wait till it gets that bad? Loads of people in the world are functioning. They're
Yeah.
just recognizing drinking is a problem in their life. They're still functioning, still holding down a job. For me, I wasn't necessarily at a dependent level where I was like so attached to it. I was at, all of the other levels as time went on. And it was important to recognize that most people find themselves along the way. And if we can help them before they get to a dependent drinker, that's amazing, right? Why do we have to wait till they get to the end, to the worst, before we help them? Let's
Mhm.
help them all the way along so they
Yeah.
can start to change and grow and move forward.
Yeah. It's like an educational thing, and like I said, like in school, like if you just address the problem, like if you find like in healthcare, like you think about cancer, like if you find cancer early, you're gonna have a better outcome. If you wait till it gets to like a level 4, you're probably not gonna
Yeah,
have a good outcome. So if that it makes sense there, why wouldn't it make sense with addiction? It's the same kind of concept. You think if you catch it like before it reaches, it's gonna metastasize. It's like that's what you want to do with like kind of the holistic thinking. Like why can't you apply the same concept? And I think it might
yeah,
be because the social aspect of addiction. Some people can't see the equivalence to like cancer
yeah.
or heart disease or diabetes. They don't see the equivalence. Like if you have an issue, it's like you can still apply similar tools from a kind of high level concept, and some people have a hard time with that because they're throwing judgmental ideas at it.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I think it's important to recognize that, like you say, there are different levels, and the sooner we can start working on it, the better. Because ultimately, I had the trauma all along in my life. I couldn't regulate my emotions. So whether I was just kind of using drugs or drinking in my early teens, I still couldn't regulate my emotions. I was still having unhealthy habits. Why do I need to wait like, 5, 10 years later before it really became a problem to then get the help? And if I'd have waited another 10, 20 years, till I was in my 30s, 40s, 50s, would have been even worse, right? So it made so much sense to get help when I did,
Mm.
because I don't want it to be escalating. And that's the same for a lot of other clients. They need to learn to regulate their emotions, process and deal with their trauma. Otherwise, when you're drinking and you're spiraling down the continuum, so say you're a weekend drinker, then you start drinking every single weekend. And COVID was a perfect example. People who were kind of weekend drinkers then started drinking a bit more in work or a bit more at home. Then some of them started to have a glass of wine at lunch. It's like, I'm working at home, want to have a glass of wine at lunch, no one else is here. Then they started drinking more and pushing their own boundaries. Then before you know it, they were a daily drinker, drinking every single day. And some people who were daily drinkers then became dependent drinkers because they started drinking in their during the day and a bit earlier and a bit more throughout the day, and then they couldn't stop the next day because they had withdrawal symptoms. So it's very important to recognize we can definitely go down the continuum if we don't change our behavior and get help. And that's why it's so important to catch things early and to be aware of them when people are saying to you, oh, you're already a heavy drinker, you should watch how much you're drinking, or you should start to change. It's normally a good warning sign to not bury our head in the sand and ignore them, and start to wake up and really start to take action and have therapy and learn some healthy tools to regulate our emotions.
Yeah, because I noticed, man, I used to be like a rideshare guy, right? I used to be one of those guys. And what I noticed, I kind of liked doing the day shift and just taking care of like commuters. Because I've noticed, like, when I tried the night shift, I just ran into a lot of people with like codependent behavior. I started getting these clients that, like, every week they're going to the bar and I'm picking them up and they're totally smashed, like, all the
Yeah,
time. And their whole socialization was about getting smashed. Like, their whole idea. And I remember when I was in college, like the boy and the sorority attitude, like Friday, Saturday night, everybody's just getting out of control. And I'm like, is that the way you really have to be to actually socialize? It seemed like people had to be kind of blasted to actually talk to somebody. Like, why do you have to be blasted? And I was with a lot of artists, and we were kind of in this different mindset that we're practicing and doing our art, and we were having these deep conversations, and we weren't doing that. We were kind of
yeah,
straight edge artists, but like there were artists that were doing that, and they felt like it's just a different kind of mind. It's probably how they were raised or what kind of environment they were in, but they feel the need for that additional, like, boost to their confidence, because it seemed to me to all kind of go down to fear. People are scared of being their authentic self because they're worried about what the reaction's going to be when they say something to somebody that's like honest or authentic, and they're too scared of that, so they gotta like mask it. And I think that's the core thing, is like we don't get trained on how to handle that.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think our social circle then becomes just filled with people who reinforce that behavior, who drink as much as us, or even more than us, or do more drugs than us, or drink more than us, and it gets reinforced socially. And then we're kind of stuck because we're around those people. If you go to the pub every day, they start to know you, you start to know them, then they become kind of quote unquote family. You're around all the time, and that can be difficult. And one of the exercises I get clients to do all of the time is to write down a list of all of their friends. So their close inner circle, their friendships that are a bit wider, their like acquaintances and people they just frequent with, and then their work colleagues, and really go through the structure of their social circle and the people around them, and write down what do they have in common with them, right? What do they have in common with them? Write down all the things they have in common with them. And
Mhm.
if drink is showing up a lot, which it will do, or drugs is showing up a lot, that's not necessarily a major big deal. It's important to recognize and note. But if drinking is the only thing that shows up, if that's all you can write for that person, John, all I do is drink. Jeremy, all I do is drink. This person, all I do is drink. Then that's definitely a big
Mhm.
indicator of your social circle. So it's really important to recognize who's in your social circle, what they're doing, and to think about what other things you have in common with them. So I call that the 10 points of commonality, to write down and think about what other things do you have in common with people around you. Is it music? For me, it would be like bike riding or extreme sports or skydiving, or it could be business, or it could be therapy or counselling or mental health or
Mhm.
vulnerability. And if you looked at my friendship group now, all of those things would be in common with a lot of the people I hang around with. Drinking and drugs not so much, and if drinking and drugs is involved, it's in this context of talking about it and working on emotions and overcoming things, right? So it's really important to think about what other things you have in common. And then when you're actually in those situations, they say socially, people can be nervous, they can be worried, they can think, how am I going to handle these situations if I don't have, liquid courage, if I haven't had a bit to drink, how am I going to manage?
Mhm.
And if you go into social situations prepared with the 10 points of commonality of thinking, what do I have in common with these
Mhm.
people, can make things a lot easier, either to shift your social circle to do more sober activities with them, like going to play golf or
Mhm.
going for a bike ride, or just generally, even if they're big drinkers or they're used to drinking with them, switching to more sober activities, or just in general going into their social situation, whether it's a birthday party or a meal out, with the idea that you're not going to drink, and also with the other 10 points of
Yeah.
commonality in your arsenal, so you can really work out what you're going to talk about and have that confidence already before you show up.
It's about kind of changing your habits, like getting like I was talking to a guy that was more like a health mentor, like a wellness mentor. And a lot of people they've got habits that are like, unhealthy habits. From like if you're into junk food or you're doing, too much coffee or whatever, too much of anything, but like you're learning to have like a holistic balance. I'm a mountain biker. Well, I like, when I'm stuck in my studio doing music, I realize that sometimes musicians might sit there and for like 4 hours straight or 8 hours straight try and get some notes right. And then you're like, well, you know what? You get diminishing returns. So if it's not working, jump on the bike, go out on the trail, get out there, kind of not focus on it. Find something where you can't really like mountain biking. What I liked about it is like I can't really focus on anything other than staying on the bike because I try to focus on something else, I might crash. Right? It's like
Yeah,
skiing. So it puts you in this mindset that gives you a lot of endorphins. It helps your body. You can start to build up. You can kind of get addicted to a good behavior of like I want to keep on going on this trail and do like 5 miles, 10 miles, 15 miles. You want to go do it. And it's actually positive. It's helping your coordination, it's helping your mental state, is increasing your heart rate. And I think if you start to get the healthy habits, you don't have to go as far as that, but even like you said, the golf course or even walking or just hiking or something to get yourself out of the bad habit is that part of like giving people to transfer like the bad habit of only doing addictive type of things that are bad for you to switching to things that are more positive.
yeah, 100%, 100%. I think the example you said, right, which was, when you're in the music, you're making music and you're just getting lost in it, you're getting diminishing returns, you can't focus, it doesn't sound right, you're doing it again and again and again, and you're getting frustrated and emotional, right? And your emotions are building, and those emotions are challenging to process. So, like you say, you then go, nope, I'm turning this off, I'm stepping away from it, I'm going to go mountain biking. You switch off, you go mountain biking, you're just so engrossed in that activity, you're so focused on it, you're not even thinking about music. Then when you're kind of having a cool down, just pedaling back, that tune just comes perfectly in your head, doesn't it? And you're like, that's the notes I wanted. And you
Yeah,
kind of
you get
find it
that.
when you take that space and
Yeah,
process the emotions. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
yeah. A lot of
And
people don't
that's,
realize, they're at yeah. I mean, at work, there's people like I'm a programmer. I'm a designer, and I used to tell people when I got into management, it was like to get these guys sitting in the desk for 8 hours straight. And I said, you know what? That's not solving it because you're not writing good code. Your code keeps on coming with all these errors. It's like because you got, and I kind of came with this idea with these other managers, like we gotta keep them at the desk. It's like, no, you gotta let them take a break. You gotta let them like walk away because it's sitting at that desk in the cube is not solving it. And you're trying to think that that just sitting there in front of the CRT, like that's gonna do it. That doesn't do it. It's like you need to actually you know, kind of get them out of that situation and find some way to walk away and come back. And then every time that I get the people that I don't kind of be a slave driver on them, and allow them some space and not micromanage them, that they actually do a better job than when I put the
yeah,
pressure cooker on them. And I think a lot of people think that that's counterintuitive. They don't understand. It's like, well, they think they try to force it. And I think anything in life, if you're trying to force it, it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. It's important not to force it and to allow things to unfold and not to push too hard. And this is a concept I teach clients all the time. Is I put it under the umbrella of meditation, right? And you have two forms of meditation in my mind. You have static meditation and active meditation. So a static meditation, a lot of people may have heard of. That's when you sort of use an app like Headspace or Calm. You put your headphones in, and for 10 minutes a day, you listen to the guided audio, and you meditate and you allow your mind to drift off and wander. Then you bring it back to the anchor and what you're focusing on. You let it drift off and wander. Then you bring it back to the anchor of the sound in your ears and the breath and your breathing. And that'll be a static meditation. And that's really amazing, static meditation. But a lot of people in the beginning find that quite hard. And they're like, Luke, my mind is racing a million miles an hour. I can't sit down. I can't sit still. Or it's just going too fast. So then I get people to do the other type of meditation, which is also really important, which is active meditation. So that's when you're so engrossed in something that we've been talking about, right? You're so engrossed in something, you're not thinking about work or any of that stuff. You're just literally focusing just on the exact situation there, like the mountain bike. You're just focusing on you going down the mountain. That's your sole focus, right? Or it could be football. You're just thinking about you getting the ball in your net. You're not thinking about work or the argument with your partner or any of that stuff that's happening. You're just solely focusing on one thing. And both of those types of meditation can be really important. The static one where you're managing your mind for 10 minutes a day, and also the active one when you're really focusing on an activity. And that really helps people regulate their emotions, right? And if we're learning to regulate our emotions and process and deal with the trauma, but also regulate our emotions in the moment, then we're less likely to get triggered and be like, oh my God, I'm just going to go and drink. I have to just get hammered. This week at work has been so stressed. I was sitting there for 8 hours and I couldn't get the code right. I have to go to the pub tonight because I've had such a stressful day. Well, if in the day you broke it up and did some active meditation, you wouldn't get to the end of the day and be so stressed and have to go and drink, right? So It's really important to regulate and manage your emotions.
Yeah, I mean that's the problem. Also, I get a lot of people they're into like perfection, and I try to tell people, like as an artist, like what I really push is the idea, the happy accident of somebody kind of just like trusting themselves. Like if you're a musician, you've been playing like 15 years, 10 years. Most musicians before even anybody knows them, been playing 10 years or something, right? And so if you start to trust yourself and you don't get stressed out, you kind of get in a flow state instead of a state of start and stop, start and stop, start and stop. Like actually just put down the idea and let it be, and don't stress about it, and let the happy accidents be there. You'll find that sometimes, like, I read this thing, I watched this thing where Elton John said when he was doing the Yellow Brick Road that everything was like third take. That today people do like 100 takes. What he's like is like he said he hated it. It's like back in the 70s, they just kind of whole band would just do a song for the first time, run through one, two, three times. A lot of times, the very early takes were the best thing because they're actually closer to the actual truth of the song. And what they found is when they were actually trying to revise it, they kept on taking away the original intent of the song. And if you actually
Yeah,
kept the earlier version, it was actually closer to the actual what the original intent of what the song was, and you just let it be. And you take some courage to do that because sometimes it doesn't have the perfect situation. Like something's like a little off on the mic, something's off on the drum, something. But sometimes the whole of it is so much better than anything you corrected. That you live with the errors, you live with the little mistakes because they were actually part of the whole beauty of it. And I think a lot of people find it hard to be honest like that or authentic like that. They have to try to make things perfect, and it stresses them out. And so, like, they
yeah,
get to the end of the day and they're all stressed out and they need that release.
yeah, exactly. And I think that you get so close and stuck in the minutia, you can't see the bigger picture. And like I say, normally the first few goes are the best, and it's important to try and focus on that. And about the perfectionism, right? That's one of the reasons I created the continuum, because a lot of clients will come to me and they'll say, or like the AA approach will be like, don't drink. This is your first day. You're sober. Don't ever drink again. Don't relapse. Don't do anything. Just stop drinking. And it's going to be plain sailing. You're going to go perfectly all the way to being sober for 1 year. And if you fail along the way, you're back to square one. You've completely ruined it. And it's a disaster. But when I work with clients along the continuum, so say someone comes to me and they're a daily drinker, and then they stop drinking for a few days, they're doing really, really well. But then during that week, they have a slip, right? I don't even call it a relapse, I
Mhm.
just call it a slip. They have a slip.
Mhm.
And then the next week, a few days, rather than saying to them, actually, you're a failure, you're still a daily drinker, you've failed, and just reinforcing that low self worth, say to them, look, you've moved along the continuum. You were a daily drinker. Now you're a weekend drinker. You only drunk a couple of times this week. You've done really, really well. That's such good progress. You haven't failed. You're actually doing amazing. And
Yeah.
then they may be like, oh, wow, that's really good. And then the next week, they may only drink once or twice, and then they may go a few weeks without drinking. And then there'll be a binge drinker. Maybe they relapse. They haven't been drinking after work every day, but it was someone's big wedding and they relapse at the wedding after a few weeks or a few months. That's okay. It's okay to have a slip. It's okay to slip and be like, oh, now I've just moved along the continuum and now I'm a binge drinker.
Mhm.
And to be like, now I need to go a bit longer. And eventually the last time will just be the last time. And I think it's really important to recognize the progress along the way and that their clients are making steps to go along the journey rather than just being like you failed, back to square one, you're rubbish, you haven't succeeded. Because I think it's really important to track the progress and really build that positive reinforcement and motivation to go along the journey.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of coaching that has this kind of all or nothing behavior from like an alpha type of person, alpha type of mindset. Oh, sorry, and it seems like that's kind of built for failure. Um, because like if you like you see what happens with people who go into like the gym and they get intimidated by the rigidity of the trainer, right? And so if they basically, tell them they got to start back to square one if they slip up, and then eventually people just fail, but or they just don't show up because it's too much, like a diet. Like if it's too rigid and you don't have room on a continuum, like it's like even music. Like there's so many people when I was like 17 quit because they were looking for this idea. Well, I'm going to be like Jimmy Page, or I'm going to be
Yeah,
like Robert Plant, or I'm gonna be like Lennon. It's like, well, how many people, you're probably not. You gotta kind of live within the capability of who you are. Like you're not gonna probably be McCartney and Lennon. You're gonna be the best version of you. But if you put
yeah,
yourself up to them, like of course you're gonna fail, right? Because you gotta be more like, why don't you be, try to have like a punk aesthetic and be like a Joe Strummer. Like, I don't care if my voice is perfect. I'm gonna do it because I feel it, right? I'm gonna go sing it because I feel it. And that kind of mindset is like, okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. I can just do it because I'm authentic and these are my real feelings and these are what I want to say, the things I want to say. And I think some people, don't understand you don't have to be perfect. You just
yeah,
you just have to, give it a try and be consistent. And it's consistent isn't doing it every day, but just like being consistent and showing up.
yeah. And it's the old adage, progress not perfection. It's about making progress, not being perfect, and moving along the journey. Because at the beginning you have so much like uninformed optimism. You just are so optimistic, but you don't have a clue what's going on. You're like, I'm just going to be a musician. I'm just going to be amazing in a year. I'll just be a superstar. And it's like you don't even know what you don't even know, right? And then you get into the journey, you're like, oh, okay, this is actually
Mhm.
quite hard, and you hit a bit of a dip. And it's at that point you need to recognize the progress and really commit to the journey. And hopefully you've had some few wins and you're starting to make some progress. And I think having that progress early on is so important. Having, whether it's weight loss, the first couple of pounds lost is really important. Whether it's in the work I do, it's like when that person goes through their first social occasion without drinking, or they really change and move along the continuum and they get their first win, they realize, oh, actually, I can make a difference. I can make a change. I can make progress. I am making steps in the right direction. And that really motivates people to keep moving forward.
Now, before we were talking about like social situations, and you were asking like, are you always with this person because they drink or they do this, they do like addictive behavior? Is it when you start to be in recovery mode? Do you have to start to manage those friends, like because those friends are totally like not where you are anymore? Because like
Yeah,
it's kind of like you think about like, is the 23-year-old me the 44-year-old me? Would
yeah,
I actually hang out with the people I was hanging out when I was 23, or they're on a different path and I really doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I think firstly, it's important to recognize that all relationships you have will come to an end, including the one with your physical body. We'll all die at some point. Every relationship will come to an end. That's okay. It's okay for relationships to end. You're not going to be friends necessarily with your best mate from birth until you're 100 years old. It's okay for things to ebb and flow, and that's okay. But you don't have to get rid of all your friends by any means. I think it's important for clients to do an inventory, to write down all of their friends, what things they have in common, and then what things that they want to shift those relationships to do. So like a lot of my friends, for example, in my social circle, I won't drink or do drugs or any of that stuff anymore, but I will go and play golf with my friends. I will go and play, for example, a poker night. I'll go and play the poker, but I won't stay till 3 a.m. doing lines of coke, right? That's just not going to be me, but I will go to the poker. Or maybe it's just a situation with golf is a good one, or riding my bike and bicycle riding and going out on my BMX. I won't go for the after party where everyone's getting hammered, or in golf, I won't go necessarily to the clubhouse and get really hammered, but I'll enjoy a nice round of golf. I'll enjoy a nice bike ride. I'll enjoy those things and shift the focus of the social connection to more sober activities. And if your friends don't like that, or they're all about drinking, or they only want to go to the pub with you, then that's a bit of a red flag. That's something you need to ask yourself, does this person really need to continue staying in my life if they're not willing to socialize with me just outside drink and drugs? So really thinking about that and changing the nature of those social relationships and those social interactions is really, really important.
It seems like you start to set up boundaries for yourself of what you're willing to experience, or what like. Sometimes I think people get kind of pushed into things because of like peer pressure. So they get pushed and go into the club to house because everybody's going to the clubhouse. It's hard to actually have the boundary of say, you know what, I like being on the golf course, but I don't like what's going on in the clubhouse. So like as long as we're on the golf course, we're cool. As long as we're playing poker, we're cool. But those things that happen at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., I'm not into that. And whoever accepts you for having that boundary and it respects it, then you can actually continue. But if they don't respect it, then you have to look at it like you said, because they think some people are not willing to do that because they want to be everything to everybody. And I think at some point you can't be everything to everybody. You have to kind of be who you are, right?
Yeah, and you have to look at what's it costing you. What is it costing you? It's costing you your work, your relationship with your partner. It's costing you so much. Is it really still worth that cost that you're paying for financially, emotionally, in terms of your relationships? Like, the cost is big when you're behaving in that way.
So a lot of people probably wonder, like, if they want to get into treatment programs, some people will say, well, I don't have the money, well, I don't have the resources, and they use that as an excuse. But it's like, well, they might be spending a lot of money on what they're in already. So it's kind of like, how do you prioritize or get people to change their mindset of, oh, this is too expensive, or this is too much time, or this is too much, like all the excuses why people would like not want to start.
Yeah. So, I mean, some of the big ones is money, like you say, money. And I think, like you said, perfect example, right, is how much people spending. A lot of people that I have assessed and researched and kind of spoken to spend anywhere from like £300-400 a month to £1,000 a month, on drink and drugs, right? So if you're paying for therapy, it's going to cost way less than that. So, and also the time as well, right? If you spend £500 a month for the next 10 years on alcohol, because you spend it for the past 10 years on alcohol, that's a lot of money, right? When you add it up over time. So definitely having that perspective of thinking what you're already spending is really, really important. And also the phantom costs. What about the costs on your mental health? What about the costs on your physical relationships? If you lose your job, if you lose your wife or your partner or your husband, what about that? How much are they worth to you? Rather than spending it on some kind of self-care. That's really, really important. I mean, one thing I do offer as well personally is scholarships. So I do offer scholarships for clients who can't really afford it. And we're doing some great work with some charities who are helping us offer scholarships to certain people. But it's also important to pay for it as well. I've paid for private therapy the whole time I've been through it. I think rehab for me was a bit much, but therapy I've managed to do for the past 7 or 8 years. and it gives you such a good return on investment. For transferring, resources from the financial bank account to build up the emotional bank account is not a problem in my eyes. That is a very worthwhile investment
Yeah.
and very, very crucial and important, because your emotional bank account is really, really important to focus on, in your mental health. And the return on investment can be unbelievable. Like the amount of amazingness I have
Yeah.
in my life now as a result of not having drink and drugs, the trust in my relationships and the emotional connection, the emotion of my family, being able to manage my emotions, the fulfillment in my job and career, like so many things I've got on the other side as well, which is really important to think about. But another big rebuttal that a lot of clients say is, Luke, I can't start counselling because I've got something coming up. I've got a wedding, I've got a birthday, I've got this coming up. I can't not drink of that. So I can't start counselling because I've got all these social occasions coming up. And what I say to them is, it's much better to navigate those with the help of someone like myself who can help you talk you through them. And in the program we offer, it has like loads of information about socializing, how to get through social events and all that kind of stuff. But it's much better to go through that with someone's help than just to go in it blind, because you're just going to end up repeating the same behavior of taking it too far and going bonkers and just drinking and using drugs too much. And there's always going to be something on the horizon, right? There's always going to be a birthday. There's always going to be Christmas. There's always going to be Halloween, New Year. Like there's so many social occasions in the year. You're never going to get there, and just year after year goes by, and there's always this social occasion coming up as the reason why you can't start now. And it's just an absolute, load of rubbish. So it's definitely good to start now. The best time to plant a tree is 100 years ago, and the second best time is right now. So it's best to start now, like we mentioned, before things get towards the dependent level. And yeah, I mean, if people are wondering, of course, they can go to the URL down below, insideaddiction.co.uk/y, and see where they're at. How far along are they on the continuum, right? Are they creeping towards the dependent level? Do they want help now? And that's a really important place to start.
And that's where you could do that free assessment so people can figure out like where they are on the continuum.
Yeah, exactly. So that allows them to figure out where they are. Are they a binge drinker, weekend drinker, daily drinker, dependent drinker? Where is their level of addiction? And what are some of the things that's causing that? Is it their subconscious program? Is it their social life that's the problem? Is it different things going on and happening in their life that's causing this to occur? And I think that will really give them a good indication of not only the problem and where they're at, but also the solution. There's so many tips. There's a 38-page document that they get that's personalized and customized to them to really tell them what things they need to be going and doing next, what scores they need to improve, and how they exactly can do that step by step.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a lot of social dynamics. You're going to the bar every weekend, but also you talk about somebody being by themselves during lockdown still got into an addictive process without being in a bar, without being at the party. So like if you've got the underlying like situation in your life where you're stressed, the way you shake off stress is you take a drink or you do a line of coke or something. I think it's like it kind of unlearning or relearning or retraining your
Yeah,
brain. And a lot of people don't realize how much you can retrain your brain. I mean, your brain is so powerful, and a lot of humans they put the glass ceiling on their capability. And like you said, like the investment in the future of making sure your whole self is there will give you so many dividends in terms of your productivity, your relationships. It's everything. It's like a heart, mind, body, soul, spirit, right? And a lot of people just think one thing, physical. They think in the physical plane, but you gotta start thinking about other things, in your life. I think that's where people make some mistakes because they think it's just one aspect, but you got to kind of look at it holistically, I think.
yeah, I think you summarized it perfectly, right? Like holistically, looking at the different other areas that are going on in people's lives, like we've spoken about today. Is it your past trauma? Is it things you've been through? Is it your healthy habits and your self-care? Self-care is a big one. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you meditating? Are you journaling? Are you looking after yourself? Are you making time for yourself? Are you showing yourself love? All of those kind of things. Self-care is a really, really important one. And then your sort of relationship, how your relationship is, and if that's on the rocks, if that's challenging, is there trust there? What's happening with your relationship? And then, yeah, your social circle, right? How your social circle is, And are they impacting you? Are they influencing you? You know, the old adage, you know, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, you know, and if you spend a lot of time with those people, that's something to reflect on and think about, and to think about what happens if people don't get help. I think that's such a key thing, you know. For my mum especially, you know, she didn't get the help that she needed, and eventually that led to her passing away from just drinking and using drugs. She went down the continuum. She wasn't born a dependent drinker, right? She went down the continuum over and over and over. Slowly she got further as time went on through the years. And when I was 10, that was it. Her body gave up. You know, she didn't manage to get the support and help she needed along the way. And it took her life. You know, this is a serious, important thing to think about, is that it does end in death if we don't change and we don't grow and we don't learn how to get control of this situation. So it's really, really important.
Yeah, I think it's important for individuals to understand their kind of position in society. You know, like for every person that can survive this and grow from it, it just helps the overall impact of all the people around you, like your the children, the friends, the husbands, the spouses, the wives. There's a whole impact of not solving it, and then it kind of gets passed down or it continues, like if you don't take a stand to try to change something. I think it's very important, the kind of conversations we have here on the podcast. I'm glad, I'm very happy that you came on the Family Like the Ghost podcast today. I want to remind people that that URL, the www.insideaddiction.co.uk/y, that will be fully clickable on all the platforms we're on. We're on all the major podcast platforms where you can view or watch or listen. And later today, we'll have a landing page that we'll give to your audience, and then they can choose where they want to listen to or watch this episode. But thank you again for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
Well, have a great day. I know it's morning here in New Hampshire. What is it, like evening where you are?
It's about the middle of the day, so it's afternoon on a Saturday. So I've got the rest of the day ahead
Middle
of
of the
me.
day. Gotta get some breakfast. But
No,
thank you
perfect.
again for being on the show.
Awesome. No, thanks very much for having me.